King of the Harem Heaven, Chapter 5. At the opening of the second day's proceedings in the trial of Prince Mike, the prosecution called a young flying roller woman named Mae Webster to the stand. Bernice Bickle was not in the courtroom. The morning newspapers had rumored that she had been sent to a rest home. "How old are you, Miss Webster?" Oscar Springer asked. 27, she admitted. "And how long have you known the defendant, Michael Mills?" "About 4 years." "Where did you first meet him?" "At my sister's home in Toronto." "How long have you been living with Prince Michael in the house at 37 Hamlin Avenue?" "Since November." "Who else was living there besides you and the prince?" "Eliza Court, Rosetta Mills, Emma Butler, Carrie Bennery, Alice Court, Mary Ellen Rollison, and Bernice Bickle." "When did Bernice first come to the house?" "On the 21st of December." "Where did she sleep?" "With Rosetta and me the first night." "And the second?" "With Mary Ellen Rowlandson." "And the third?" "I don't know." "Do you know if Bernice ever slept with Prince Michael?" "Yes. There was a night when she slept with Michael and Eliza both. I remember because Eliza left and came down to sleep with us. I made the bed in Michael's room that morning and there was blood on the sheet." "Do you know if anyone else saw that sheet?" "I showed it to Eliza," she said. "Hallelujah. Now that obedience has been obtained, Israel will be gathered." In the middle of the row of bearded, long-haired pillars, Ben Purnell had to catch himself to keep from laughing, to keep from nodding in satisfaction. The state's attorney was recovering nicely from the surprise setback of the day before and was wading in boldly with a new attack, once again stressing the essential legal question of virginity. Ben's eyes were swollen. He'd been struggling to stay awake as he'd waited for Judge Kinney to enter, for the proceedings to resume. All through the hours of darkness, he probed about the Hamlin Avenue house with a candle, hunting that crucial piece of paper. He'd found enough interesting material to support a skillful blackmailer indefinitely, and he'd appropriated a good share of it for use in a future bid for power. But nowhere had he seen the confession of Bernice Bickle. "How did you come to tell about occurrences at Prince Michael's house after you were taken to the Woodbridge station?" the assistant prosecutor was asking the witness. "Were any inducements offered to you?" "No, there was no inducement." Oscar Springer turned to the bench. "Your Honor, in statement made to the police, this witness said that the proceedings at Michael Mills' house were all right because it was to cleanse their bodies. I'd like to have her explain to this jury exactly what she meant by that." "I'll allow it," Judge Kinney ruled. "What did you refer to, Miss Webster?" "Sleeping with Prince Michael." "You said that you came to the station prepared to deny everything. Did you feel that you were still under the prince's power?" "Objection," Colonel John Atkinson thundered. "I was." "Please don't answer until the objection is disposed of, young lady," Judge Kinney told her. "Overruled. Allow the answer to stand." "Your witness," Oscar Springer told the colonel. As Atkinson walked to the stand, Ben Purnell watched him apprehensively. "Isn't it true, Miss Webster," he opened cross-examination, "that at first you denied having relations with Michael Mills?" "Yes." "Where were you living when you decided to change your story?" "At the police station." "You've been living there ever since March 28th? "Yes." "Now isn't it true that Detective Shoemaker and Lombard have had free access to your room, that they've taken you for walks and even to Belle Isle on occasion, that they've spent many hours in your room, playing checkers, smoking in your presence throughout this period during which you changed your story?" Mae Webster admitted this was true. "Incidentally, how late have these men stayed in your room at the Woodbridge station? As late as, say, 11? "Sometimes, not very often." "As late as midnight?" "Never that late." "That's all, I think." "A few more questions." Oscar Springer rose for redirect. "Did the defendant call a meeting of all the pieces in his godhead about a week before his arrest?" "Sister Eliza called it. She said Prince Michael wanted to talk to us." "And what did the illustrious prince have to say at that meeting?" "He made us swear we'd say no if anybody asked anything." "If anyone asked about carnal misconduct on his part?" "Yes." "Thank you, Mae." The state's attorney turned away, and Colonel Atkinson hurried back in before the girl could rise. "Do you believe in God, Miss Webster?" he asked softly. "I don't know," she shook her head. "I don't even know anymore." Do you believe in the Bible? The Bible upon which you took an oath to tell the truth? I don't know if I believe anything anymore. Did Dr. Daniel Laferte and Dr. Charles A. Devendorf examine you and Bernice for evidence of sexual intercourse when you were first brought to the Woodbridge station? There were 2 doctors who examined us. I don't know their names. Tell us about it. I don't know what there is to tell. They examined us and it hurt. Bernice cried out several times. Didn't anyone tell you these doctors found no evidence of sexual intercourse? Objection! Oscar Springer shouted. Your Honor, counsel knows full well that a negative result of vaginal slide sperm test warrants no such conclusion. Of course, Judge Kinney nodded. Sustained. That's all. Colonel Atkinson went back to his seat beside the bearded prince and his cross-faced spiritual affinity. The people call Mary Ellen Rowlandson, Oscar Springer announced. Once again, Ben Purnell had to admire Mike Mills' taste in women. This flying roller girl had an enticing walk, even in the prim clothing provided for her appearance here. How old are you, Mary Ellen? The assistant prosecutor asked. 19. When did you first meet the defendant, Prince Michael Mills? Last November. Where did you meet him? At a revival meeting in Ontario. When did you come to live at his house at 37 Hamlin Avenue? On December 22nd. Did you come there of your own free will? No, my parents sent me. By the way, what virtue were you supposed to represent as a piece of the Godhead? Temperance. Who else lived in that house at that time? Prince Michael, Sister Eliza, Mrs. Mills, May Webster, Alice Court, Emma Butler, Bernice Bickle, and there was a girl named Armstrong there for a while. I never knew her first name. Where did you sleep the first night? With Bernice. The second? With May Webster and Mrs. Mills. The third? With Prince Michael. Do you know if Bernice ever slept with Prince Michael? I know for sure she did on February 21st. Were you in the room? No. Did you see the bedclothes afterward? No. Did you hear Prince Michael say anything about the blood on those bedclothes? No. But before that I heard him say that Bernice was very rebellious and that the Spirit of God would not plead with her much longer. How did you come to leave Prince Michael's house? I got a letter out to my father telling him what was going on. He came and got me with a policeman. When was this? Early in March. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Oscar Springer turned to the colonel. Your witness. Atkinson took his time approaching the witness stand. Tell me, Mary Ellen, did you swear out a warrant in Recorder's Court of the City of Detroit charging both Michael K. Mills and Eliza Court with rape? Yes, when my father first came and got me. But you subsequently dropped those charges? I wanted to go home. I didn't want to stay in Detroit any longer. I can understand that, Mary Ellen. But didn't you come back to Detroit on April 12th? And haven't you been living at the Woodbridge station ever since? Well, I wanted to clear my name. Clear your name? In what manner was your name attacked, and by whom? I don't know. Tell me, Mary Ellen, are you also going to claim you were a chaste girl before you went to live at Prince Michael's? The colonel sneered. Objection, Oscar Springer shouted. Sustained, Judge Kinney glared at Colonel Atkinson. No more questions, the defense attorney smiled. As his last witness, Assistant Prosecutor Springer called Police Chief Christopher C. Starkweather to the stand. Under examination, the officer related that the defendant was brought to the Woodbridge station for questioning on the evening of April 11th, that he was confronted with a statement made by Bernice Bickle, and that he did not deny the charges. Do you remember his exact words? Oscar Springer asked. Yes. He said, I will neither affirm nor deny it. I am not responsible for it. I will not attempt to justify myself. Under cross-examination, Chief Starkweather admitted arresting all of the people he found at the Hamlin Street house, in spite of the fact that he had warrants only for Michael Mills and Eliza Court. He also admitted giving audience to a citizens committee and assigning a Captain Weiler to investigate their charges that the Flying Roller Colony was a menace to public morals. The prosecution then rested its case, and Colonel Atkinson objected violently to this. Other witnesses had been named in the original information supplied to the court: Rosetta Mills, Alice Court, Emma Butler, Detectives J.L. Lombard, and H.E. Shoemaker. The colonel demanded that the people produce these witnesses. Oscar Springer argued that Mrs. Mills was living somewhere in Canada and was unobtainable. that the others were available, but that an irrefutable case, in his opinion, had been established without the use of further witnesses. Judge Edward D. Kinney ruled that if Colonel Atkinson wished to examine the others, he could call them as defense witnesses. A brief recess was held so the colonel might talk with Alice Court and Emma Butler, who were being held in the judge's chambers. Upon returning, Colonel John Atkinson opened for the defense by characterizing Michael K. Mills as a victim of religious prejudice. And yet the Israelite faith, he insisted, differed little from other Christian faiths. The Israelites believed in baptism like the Baptists, in confession like the Catholics. They believed in the Trinity. In fact, he claimed, there was only one essential difference. Most Christians believed in the second coming of Christ. The Israelites believed that the time of this coming was close at hand. Prince Michael, the colonel insisted, was here in court only because of a gigantic, intricate plot hatched by certain Detroit real estate interests and certain North Side merchants. Because of their long hair and beards, it was thought the Israelites would depress real estate values in the Hamlin Avenue area by causing other residents to move out. Because the Israelites were vegetarians who bought their few necessities from wholesalers, local merchants resented their coming and were also involved in the plot against Prince Michael. Colonel Atkinson went on to promise that he'd prove that the Detroit police and Detroit newspapers actively joined in this conspiracy, that all of the girls who testified against the prince were paid to do so. He repeated his earlier insistence that Bernice Bickle was not a chaste girl before coming into the colony. As his first witness, the colonel called Detective Judson Lombard to the stand. Under questioning, Lombard admitted that Mrs. Rosetta Mills had hesitated for a long time before making a criminal complaint against her husband, and that members of a citizens committee had urged her on. Oscar Springer declined to cross-examine. The colonel then called Detective Henry Shoemaker. "When was the first time you entered the house at 37 Hamlin Avenue?" "March 2nd of this year. I went up with Mr. Rowlandson to get Mary Ellen out of there." "Did you attend a citizens meeting held at Brown's Hall to discuss means of ridding Detroit of the Israelites? Was Mrs. Rosetta Mills present at that meeting?" "She was." "Is it true that when she was asked to make criminal complaint against the defendant, she twice refused before finally doing so?" "It is." "Have you visited these girls at the Woodbridge station regularly, often in the evening?" "I have." "Have you sometimes stayed as late as 11? "On a very few occasions." "Your witness," Colonel Atkinson told Oscar Springer. The young assistant prosecutor merely rose from his chair. "Just one question. Has there ever been anything in any way improper in your relations with these girls? Or, to the best of your knowledge, anything improper done by any other member of the police department?" "Of course not," Detective Shoemaker snorted. "There was a police matron present at all times." "Thank you." The state's attorney looked at the defense lawyer, shook his head sadly, then sat back down. Very suddenly, Colonel John Atkinson pulled his second major surprise out of the hat. A surprise almost as shocking as his suggestions about Bernice's confession had been. One by one, he called Bernice Bickle's parents, William and Elizabeth Bickle, to the stand as character witnesses for the defendant, Michael Mills. Both professed their trust and belief in their prince, in his immaculate character, in his purity of conduct. Both denounced their daughter hotly, branding her a habitual and imaginative liar and swearing they'd never speak to her again. While the entire courtroom sat stunned in silence, Assistant Prosecutor Springer fought valiantly to shake their righteous, smug-faced testimony. But it was hopeless. By this time, they'd convinced themselves they were telling the truth. The best the young state's attorney could do was to show the jury what blind, unreasoning fanatics they were. On that note, Judge Kinney adjourned for the day. From where Ben Purnell sat, things weren't going at all well. The reasonable doubt that the jury needed had been planted by the colonel's claim that Bernice had been no virgin when she first came to the God House. That doubt had been enlarged and hardened by the testimony of the Bickles. If it remained in the mind of a single juror, the prince would go free and return to rule the Israelite colony. And all of Ben's elaborate plans would be destroyed, all of his intricate plotting and scheming wasted. He had to find that confession.